Hello and welcome to Moderate Fantasy Violence, a podcast about pop culture and the world around it. I'm Alistair.
And I'm Nick.
And in today's episode, we will be discussing Christopher Nolan's epic adaptation of Homer's Odyssey, the new blockbuster movie that's just hit the cinemas. And then after that, we will be visiting Widow's Bay, a new horror comedy from Apple TV. But before all of that, Nick, do you have anything to recommend to our listeners?
Well, bit of a continuation from a recent review on this very podcast. I went back and read the second storyline of Absolute Batman by Scott Snyder and Nick Dragotta, now that it's all up on the DC app. So yeah, this is, as teased at the end of the first storyline, this is where the big Batman finds himself facing an even bigger version of Bane in the Absolute Universe. And also, there's also a two-parter where he briefly meets Absolute Mr. Freeze as well. Basically, the thing connecting these two storylines, I guess, is he meets two new villains and they're both basically monsters. Mr. Freeze is a sort of horrifying ice creature, and Bane is just this disgusting, musty monstrosity who just keeps growing and growing to what I would describe as body horror proportions. It's not just, that guy's like a big wrestler. It's like, that guy's just like a big blob of non-specific flesh. Jesus Christ.
Ooh, it sounds quite grim, actually, yeah. So they definitely look stepping up the body horror element.
Yeah, I mean, we've read Absolute Batman, and obviously there's a certain, I don't want to say edgy because I think that's taken on a negative connotation nowadays, but a certain extreme, a certain sort of knowingly hardcore, knowingly let's see if we can push this to a conscious next level vibe. Make things a bit bigger, a bit more violent or horrific or intense. Yeah, so you end up with this storyline where Batman gets held prisoner by Bane in an attempt to psychologically and physically break him, and just gets repeatedly beaten by this enormous fleshy blob who then proceeds to torture his friends and attack him to try and, break him down.
Oof, it does sound quite grim, yeah. I mean, I remember the Batman in the Absolute Batman that we read was like, a big, strong, very like muscly guy. But yeah, they've sort of created a sort of monstrous Bane who's even, I guess, bigger and stronger.
Yeah, it is kind of straight into the idea that, well, if considering that Bane was always, bigger and more muscly than Batman, with the massive Absolute Batman, they've got to go like comically, horrifically massive for Bane. And yeah, mission accomplished. Nick Dragotta, as ever, doing a lot to sell the sheer, over-the-top, in-your-face visceralness of this, like this sort of horrible, fleshy grimness. At the start of every issue, there's like a double-page title spread, which, in a lot of these issues, is just a close-up of some horrible-looking, fleshy blob, which becomes sort of clearer what it is as the story goes along, but at the beginning, it's just a bit, what the fuck is this? But it does very much set you up for what you're moving into.
Interesting, yeah. And I suppose they've got slightly different takes on the villains as they've got slightly different takes on the heroes. I mean, it kind of reminds me of ages ago in the podcast when we were reading Ultimate Spider-Man, and their version of the Green Goblin was actually like a sort of giant goblin-type monster rather than like a man in an armoured suit. So they've changed the villains around a bit, made them different, I suppose, I guess, so they don't just do the same thing over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, obviously Absolute is, in a way, the sort of DC equivalent of Marvel's Ultimate line, and this is sort of their version of the what would it be nowadays take. You may remember from when we read it, Bruce Wayne has his group of friends who are like earlier pre-villain versions of a lot of Batman villains, like Harvey Dent and Oswald Cobblepot and Waylon Jones and people like that, people who have clear, I'm going to be a Batman villain names. Yeah, we do see in the second storyline, inevitably, because, once you've done that and it becomes fairly obvious what's going to happen to them, so you might as well not piss around. So in the second storyline, they do all start to move clearly a bit closer to their villainous destinies.
Interesting, yeah. So they're building up these characters. Yeah, I mean, what I liked about the Absolute Batman that we read is it did seem to have a genuine different take on Batman, which is, obviously a character that lots of people know well, not just from the comics, obviously, but like films, TV shows, video games. And it did seem like a different version of Batman compared to what we've seen before. I was going to say give some specifics, but I thought maybe we shouldn't spoil some of the differences between Absolute Batman and the original Batman. I suppose people can go back and listen to the episode where we discuss that if they want to.
Yeah. Go back to listen to the older episode where we already spoiled it.
Yeah.
But yeah, the difference between them, which has been, I think, quite heavily advertised, is the fact that this Batman is not a billionaire and doesn't have, access to this ludicrous range of toys. Although, he does have, to be fair, an elaborately engineered Batman suit. But I think the idea is that he's meant to have made this himself. It's more sort of armor and sharp edges rather than like advanced computer tech.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a bit more homespun, I suppose. Yeah, I guess Batman's got to have the suit, I suppose. So yeah.
He's got to have a cool-looking Batman suit, but it's just a bit less of a billion-dollar bit of tech, I suppose, and slightly more of this chunky homemade bit of metal armor he wears with lots of knives built into it. Yeah, all of which is so far very little good against Bane. Yeah, they've One of the things that has been announced in the last few weeks, I think, is they're already making an Absolute Batman animated series with the writer of the comics as the showrunner. So that might be interesting. I'll have to see how that lands. I think animation's definitely the way to go with this, I think it's built so much on this over-the-top imagery that it would be doing an injustice to Nick Dragotta's art to try and do it in like half-assed live action.
Yeah, and he also said it was quite influenced by manga and anime as well, which I suppose lends itself to an animated take.
Yeah, in a world where we've had Invincible, I think Absolute Batman, if done right, could work, could be a big deal. But that has only just been announced, and animation famously takes ages, so probably not going to be dealing with the effects of that on culture for a while.
Maybe it's something we'll revisit to review in the podcast, yeah. So the story's continuing to be consistently good. It's still developing well then, I guess, across the second issue.
Yeah, no, it's still going, still looking good. I'm up to about issue 14 now, I think, and still pretty strong. There's still the looming presence of the Joker, who I guess will have to appear on panel soon. Well, in a sort of non-shadowy, direct way. But yeah, I think I'm about 6 months behind the current comics, but I will catch up one day. And yes, I'm still enjoying this. I can see why this is, the number one comic, which has single-handedly saved comic shops or whatever. It's very tense and easy to get into, very sort of straightforward and fun and exciting.
Yeah, I remember there was quite a lot of dense storytelling in it. Quite a bit happened, I think, in the first volume that we read. It's well written, I suppose, and well plotted.
Yeah, in a world where a lot of single issue comics sometimes read like, here's, the next 20 pages of the graphic novel, it's got about 5 scenes in it. Absolute Batman has about 12, 13 panels a page, and loads of stuff happens, and it always feels like you've had a pretty big chunk of storyline. So I think people are appreciating that as well. So yeah, I've been continuing down the absolute path. Alistair, what have you been up to?
So I've been reading a novel, or more accurately, I've been reading the sequel to a novel, but I think it's best I talk about the original first, because it's probably my favourite book that I read last year. I'm here to talk about The Will of the Many by James Islington. So yeah, this came out in 2023, so it's fairly contemporary. It's an epic fantasy novel, and yeah, it's really, really good. It's one of those proper, brick-sized, massive novels. Yeah, with a lot of world building and things like that. This one is set in a fictionalized version of the Roman Republic. The magic is based around what they call seeding, which is when you give some of your will to someone above you in a pyramid, and then as the pyramid goes up, there's more and more people seeding, so the people towards the top of the pyramid are very, very powerful, and this is built on the people at the bottom being very depleted. I mean, that's why it's called The Will of the Many, because it's all about will that is going upwards. Yeah, and obviously there's some fairly obvious political analogies to this, not just to the Roman Republic that was very hierarchical, and there was a few elite families that dominated, and a lot of plebs at the bottom who didn't have a particularly good time of it. But also, yeah, you can see the analogies to today as well, and hierarchical capitalist society that we live in. So yeah, it's very interesting on that front. The other thing I'll say about it is it's just really well written. Just in terms of it's tense, it's dramatic, there's lots of exciting things happen. Barely, does a few chapters go by before there's not some form of action or confrontation. And also there's a really, really fascinating world, how the broader history and politics of it works, and the magic system is quite complicated. It kind of teases you along nicely with every few chapters you find out slightly more that makes it make a bit more sense, but also raises some questions, so that it keeps you going in that way. So if you like your epic fantasy, this is definitely a really good slice of the stuff.
Okay. Are there any obvious comparisons to big well-known things?
Yeah, I'm trying to think of something that would be a good comparison. Yeah, quite a lot of it takes place in this academy where the people learn to use will and be trained in the magic system, and yeah, it's on this sort of remote island where there's ancient ruins that have secrets to the sort of larger world building and backstory of the world. So being another sort of at least slightly set in a magic school type thing. I don't want to say that the obvious comparison is Harry Potter, but I guess there's been quite a lot of stories set in magic schools. But yeah, it does also have that sense of there's there are secrets hidden in the school. Yeah, it's not just a school, there's a lot more going on there, and the histories of the tutors. It does remind me a bit of, so it's what I read recently was Nevernight, which was really, really good. And then the sequel was God's Grave? I can't remember the third one, by J. Christoph. They were really, really good. That's set in, again, a sort of fantasy magic school, but for magical assassins. And that one's really quite violent and disturbed. That also has a pretty, elaborately complicated world with, a lot of, history and characters and things like that. So, yeah, those are some comparisons that spring to mind.
Yeah, I've got... Is it The Incandescence by Emily Tesh on my to-read pile somewhere? I think that's another magic school one. I got that because I liked Some Desperate Glory by Emily Tesh, which is really good.
Yeah, that is a great novel. That won the Hugo Award in the year it was published. Yeah, well, that's a sci-fi one, but yeah, that's set in a sort of military academy.
Yeah, that's just for a change. Yeah, that's more of a sci-fi school.
Yeah. That's like maybe a bit more like Ender's Game or something like that, I suppose, which is like the Space Military Academy novel. But yeah, that's really, really good. I mean, the good thing about that is it's quite a good exploration of fascist society and what it's like to live in one but not be aware of that you live in a fascist society in a sort of weird, like, lonely fascist space rock. Yeah, there's been quite a sort of like spate of these very, I feel, like political science fiction novels and fantasy novels lately. I guess it's partly to do with like the times we live in. Yeah, obviously like Some Desperate Glory is more directly talking about like the sort of military fascism. In that, the sort of human supremacy movement, that these sort of humans believe that they're better and stronger than everyone else, which again has a lot of comparisons to like the white supremacy movement. And in this, I guess there's sort of a political edge that it's like this sort of hierarchical society. The people at the top don't really care much for the people below and literally suck the sort of the life from them for their own power and things like that. Yeah, then right at the top there's like a very few, I think there's like 3 or so people who are right at the top of the pyramids and who are unbelievably powerful. And yeah, I do like the kind of obvious political analogy of this. Yeah, and the main character came from a sort of peaceful island nation that was like invaded and conquered by this hierarchical society and has a lot of like resentment and anger about all of this. But yeah, again, it's sort of a classic outsider looking in at the system, which works really, really well. That's used quite a lot in these sort of novels because it means the audience can discover things the same way as the main character, because as they go through the world they discover things, and that's a kind of like useful like cipher for the audience or the reader.
Well, yeah, I mean, in some ways that's why Some Desperate Glory was interesting, because it starts with this insider who, if anything, moves towards having a more outside perspective. But yeah, a lot of time, obviously, you have the new person or the new pupil or whoever who can discover the school along with the reader.
Yeah, no, it's a useful way to write. Yeah, I can really strongly recommend this. I mean, the world building gets really quite complex, especially into the second one, which I'm reading right now, which is The Strength of the Few. And they throw in a plot line of alternate realities, which is kind of cool, and like different ways that like the world could have gone. So there's the world of the hierarchy in the first novel, and they throw in these like other alternative ones, including one that's a bit more sort of pre-Christian Britain with druids and things like that, and then one that's like a bit more sci-fi dystopia. That's all, everything's like factories and poisoned land and things like that. And so they build up the sort of the lore of how these 3 worlds came to exist. There was a lot of really fascinating stuff, and like as you say, it's quite well done that like every so often the character stumbles across some answers, but also there'll be some new concepts thrown in that makes you go like, oh, okay, like I wonder what that is. Yeah, and crucially, the writer James Islington has a really good way of like giving you answers, and like you do feel like you're learning more about the world, and it's like expanding and becoming more aware, and like so they do give you sort of answers, but also at the same time keep the sense of mystery of being like, oh, there's still clearly more to discover and clearly like more going on. So if you're a fan of your sort of epic world building, then that's another element of this that really works.
Okay, yeah, no, sounds good.
Yep, so you can recommend this, yeah.
Okay, and first up this fortnight's what might be one of the film events of the year, I suppose. It's Christopher Nolan's adaptation of the Odyssey, the epic poem by Homer about the struggles of Odysseus, a soldier who goes off to fight in the Trojan War and then has a very long, very difficult journey home, encountering all your favourite classic mythological monsters, whilst meanwhile back on the home front, his wife is being unpleasantly pursued by a house full of suitors. Will he get back in time to deal with them bastards? Over the course of these 3 hours, we will find out. Alistair, we've seen this. What did you think of it?
I mean, I really liked it. I thought it was very good. I mean, like, it really is like a modern epic in the sense of like, this kind of classic epic films they used to make under the studio system. And they used to do these big like historical, biblical, mythological epics. I mean, probably a lot of people watching when they were young, like the versions they did of things like Jason and the Argonauts, or, like big films like Ben-Hur or things like that, or Spartacus. And it does have that sense of like, this like enormous cast, like enormous scope, tackling like a big chunky piece of ancient literature straight on, which also the epics did. There was no wink and a nod or any sense of irony. It was more that like there's like straight up like, here is Homer's story, the whole thing pretty much. They didn't break into parts. Kind of like a big epic film, and I kind of really admired the sort of scope and ambition to do this. The cast they assembled is great, and I think everyone did like a really good performance. You go to the cinema and you get this big experience that you can't really get from like other mediums. So I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, no, I thought this was really good. I wasn't entirely sure what to expect with this. Was Christopher Nolan going to do some sort of clever metatextual take on the Odyssey? Was there going to be some surreal moment where it cuts forward to the present day or anything? But no, as Alistair kind of already said, it's pretty much a dead straight historical epic. A 3-hour story telling Odysseus's adventures. Just, takes it dead seriously. Lots of detail, lots of expensive looking Trojan war sets and costumes. Obviously, the Cyclops turns up looking both uniquely disgusting and just like you imagine a Cyclops should look. Yeah, no, I really enjoyed this as well. I thought it really kept telling the story really clearly and excitingly. It really just kept it moving along. I don't know, I don't think it was one of Nolan's more pretentious works. I actually think by Nolan's standards it was a very straightforward action story which just kept the beats moving along and kept just throwing the next thing at you and moving you into the next action scene or fight scene. Obviously it helps that the Odyssey is quite episodic, so it's always just a case of, for a lot of the film, and then they slogged along to meet the next monster. And that's pretty much what happens. There's a little bit of a sort of nesting flashback narration structure, but nothing that I think really the average person will struggle to follow, I don't think. I think this is good. I think this is one of the more straightforwardly enjoyable Christopher Nolan films.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely just like taken the epic ancient story and like put it into the template of like a modern blockbuster with dramatic beats, all the right moments, plenty of battles, plenty of big villains and things like that. It kind of works well, taking what is like a story that's supposed to be originally like read aloud and then it's been like written down into this like modern format. What I liked about it is that it's bringing in these elements from like the original story in like a very like direct way. So I was thinking about comparing it to about 20 years ago or so, maybe a bit more. There was a film called Troy, which is a version of the Iliad with Brad Pitt as Achilles, and that came out early to mid-aughts. It was very much the vibe of like dark and gritty realism was like the popular thing at the time. So it's the time of like Batman Begins and Casino Royale, so these like big franchises have been rebooted in a way that was like, let's make them down to earth and like relatable and believable. And that version of the Iliad doesn't have gods or monsters in it. It's just people. Yeah, I mean, like the people believe in the gods and they say, things like, we honor the gods today, but like there's no sense that the gods exist or intervene in the story in any way. And that is the kind of the biggest difference that film has to the Iliad itself, in which the gods are actively characters in the story and directly intervening, like Apollo forging Achilles' armor and things like that. And this version, there's no attempt to make, say, the giants a sort of island of people who are just especially big and tall. No, they are like 3 or more times the height of a regular person. There are like gods, like Zendaya appears as like Athena. There's, Circe, the sorceress doing actual magic. There's the cliff monster Scylla. So there's no attempt to make it basically being like, oh, this is what it must have really been like, because like, oh, actually the giants were just like particularly big people. No, the giants are giants. There's no attempt to basically like be here's like a quote unquote realistic version. It's very much like, no, this is what it says in the text, and so that's what we do. And like, it's interesting. I think we've got to a point now that people are willing to accept in their cinema, like, I'm dancing around calling them fantastical or mythological, because like the people, when Homer was like noting this down, sort of 800 BC, people really believed in this was as real as the way that people believe in like Jesus or, Muhammad or Vishnu or whatever. And it seems a bit insulting to call those beliefs fantastical or fictional. And it seems insulting to people who lived a long time ago to call their beliefs fantasy. But anyway, the point is we've got to a point in cinema where these elements can be brought into an epic film. And audiences are ready just to go with that as part of that's the story, rather than they don't need a sense of like, no, I want this to be realistic, I want this to be quote unquote believable, by not having like giants or sorcerers or gods in the story.
I mean, if you want to make a film which is, a historical epic and doesn't have gods or monsters in it, then just make a different film. But I mean, I think it's a very human perspective still. Like, there's no long sequences where the gods chill up on Olympus having a chat about that little Odysseus guy. It's still very much from the perspective of the humans, mostly Matt Damon as Odysseus and Tom Holland as Telemachus, all just sort of looking up at the magical creatures and the gods with a sense of either wonder or fear normally. So he's not getting too sucked into the deep fantasy of it. It's still very much from the perspective of, we are little people and this magic and god stuff is, again, either amazing or terrifying. It's what I think you need to adapt the Odyssey properly. Like, I don't know how a version of the Odyssey where it attempts to explain all this would work.
I mean, it wouldn't really work if it was the Odyssey. I mean, like, the Iliad has less monsters and things like that. There's not really, it's more about, just a war between humans. There's less like islands with strange monsters or creatures on them. But then again, they're like, the gods do directly intervene in the story, like, intervene in the battle to like save a hero by directly like whisking them away, or or like forging weapons and things like that. I guess it's like the choice of the story you make, but then again, like, they did change the Iliad a lot to make it work. The main thing is that this is like shows like how much like things have changed.
Yeah, a bit of it. Christopher Nolan clearly somewhat entering his dad phase as a filmmaker. First an adaptation of a biography of Oppenheimer, and then an adaptation of the Odyssey. These are, not to put too fine a point on it, very much the books from the bookshelf in your dad's office.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Yeah, very much the case.
If that's what he wants to do, then fair enough. I am probably entering the age to appreciate that sort of stuff myself. These things are major, epic, enduring stories for a reason.
Yeah. And he's got the sort of the scope to do this and things like that. Yeah, I guess like after Oppenheimer, he basically write his own ticket.
The scope and indeed, the pull, the financial power.
Yeah. I mean, like, to get this done and get his vision executed, it's it's like a big deal to be able to do this and like to be able to get the resources, like the cast, all the on-location filming, the special effects, a film of this length, the whole thing shot in IMAX with IMAX cameras. So I can imagine it looks pretty good in IMAX. And it's great to see like an auteur director basically being given like a free rein to basically like make the film you want to make. I mean, I'm sure there's some constraints, but like this is make the film you want to make, and people are kind of excited for it. And when I'm looking at the booking the tickets, like they were block programming it, and most of the screens seem to be like sold out. So people are responding well to this. I guess like Nolan is very, very popular, and he's got a host of Hollywood A-listers in this film. But like it's a bit of a gamble doing this. I guess he's got to the point when people are like, go on, Nolan, execute your vision, and it's worked.
Yeah, no, I do appreciate that he is very much in the I'll do what I like stage of his career. But, he hasn't entirely vanished up his own arse, I suppose. In fact, if anything, stuff like this is arguably more, as I was saying earlier, at the more accessible end of the Christopher Nolan spectrum. This might be the most straightforwardly, this is an action movie that almost anyone could enjoy that he's done since Batman, possibly.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of ink has been spilled over Christopher Nolan's signature seems to be playing around with time. That's kind of one of the biggest themes that runs across all his films. And no one will be surprised to find out that there's playing around with time here, but it doesn't really like make the story like overly complicated or things like that. Again, it's one of his more subtle ways of playing with time, in that a lot of the story is told as flashbacks. So there's a kind of like extended bit at the beginning, setting up Ithaca, where Odysseus is from, with Tom Holland as Telemachus and Anne Hathaway as Penelope, both being very good, and like all the suitors and like the stories coming through of like the kind of Trojan War, and then they use that to flash back to the war itself, and show the ending with Odysseus doing the famous wooden horse and all the rest of it. Later on there's like you get Odysseus on an island and sort of reflecting on his journey and how he got there, and then that kind of leads to flashbacks that fill in the various things we've been talking about, such as the Cyclops, the giants, Circe, various other bits and pieces, Scylla and Charybdis. That's kind of a way to play with time. Also, it kind of makes the story more accessible, because the fact they can jump around means they can compress things to some degree. I mean, this is nearly a 3-hour film, but it's famously, the Odyssey is famously long. So
well, I mean, much as I've complained about long films in the past, I was not expecting the Odyssey to be shorter than 2.5 hours, and to be honest, was mildly relieved it was shorter than 3 by about 10 minutes.
Yeah, there has been some effort made to compress things and move things around into like a way that allows them to get through the story without it being too long, and also, as I said, like take this epic that's structured like an epic poem into like books, and like structure it into something that's like recognizable to a cinema audience, with initial setup phase, the sort of development in the middle with a big crucial mid bit, beginning of Act 3 low, and then like building up to a cinematic conclusion. And that partly the way that Nolan plays with time is what allows him to do that, also, and telling non-linear stories, but also it's kind of what makes it just work as a film. And it's done subtly enough that like you're not sitting there going like, oh, this is a film that's doing something very bold with its use of time, in the same way that like Memento, Inception, Tenet, Interstellar, all these films have something very apparent to the audience that like your perception of time has been played with. Whereas in this, it's more just like some flashbacks. We're all familiar with them.
Yeah, no, it's just a standard flashback structure. He's always very careful to, I think, for the most part, walk you into the flashbacks by taking you first back to the older version of Odysseus, who is recounting the journey, and then back into the journey in a very careful way to make sure everyone's still following along with what's happening. Older Odysseus has a clearly much greyer, scruffier beard to make it clear again that we're in that particular part of the time frame. So Nolan's, I think, again, not in I'm here to confuse you mode here. It's very straightforward. It's very easy to follow for the most part.
Yeah, no, certainly, yeah.
As you say, the enormous cast of superstars, to the point where you do get, surprisingly well-known people turning up to do about 2 scenes. Like Lupita Nyong'o's in this. Doesn't do much, but she's very good. So's Elliot Page. Yeah,
Elliot Page is like, I think, pretty much the first person to appear on screen. It's interesting. Yeah, I mean, playing Sinon, who's a character from the Trojan War, not from the Odyssey so much. But yeah, very good. Yeah, Lupita Nyong'o as Helen of Troy, obviously the famous beauty that set 1,000 ships to sail. Iconic role, if one with not much screen time. Yeah, we mentioned Anne Hathaway and Tom Holland, yeah.
Yeah, Anne Hathaway's really good, yeah. She, again, gets only a few big scenes, but she does get, especially towards the end, some very strong, seething moments. Yeah, it's a very memorable performance. Also, Samantha Morton as the witch Cersei.
Yeah.
Has a sort of strong villainous mode in one of the segments. She's very good.
Yeah, and they're also crucial in those also like a bit more like independent women characters, which obviously the Odyssey, funny enough, being nearly 3,000 years old, does not have great roles for women. Well, in the story itself, unless you like do things like here, like actually have Penelope going like, they say Ithaca has an empty throne. I've been sitting on it for years and running it, but no one, I can't take over because I'm a woman. Which is it's good. Again, we're in modern blockbuster territory based on an epic story, or like Cersei also very much standing in for like the bystanders who get swept up into war. Again, usually women. Thought John Bernthal as Menelaus was very good. He does grizzled tough guy soldier well, so yeah, funny enough, he's doing grizzled tough guy Bronze Age soldier quite well here.
Yeah. John Bernthal turning up as a grizzled veteran is borderline typecasting at this point, but he is extremely good in these sort of parts. He has a lot of presence.
Yeah. Well, he's also, you can believe in him as Menelaus, someone who started absolutely gargantua war because of his own anger. Zendaya as Athena, I thought was good, appearing, quite ethereal and stuff, and sort of standing on the edge of things.
Yeah, no, a particularly slight part for Zendaya. I can't remember if she actually gets a spoken line. She might get one or two, but she, again, is styled very strikingly, and possibly just because she has a very memorable face in our times, does a very good job here of playing that part.
She's good at doing a knowing look, which is quite funny in Spider-Man Homecoming and is like quite dramatic here. So I'm trying to think, there's just so many people just turning up.
Matt Damon, we probably shouldn't forget Odysseus himself. Matt Damon as Odysseus. It's possible to take Matt Damon for granted, turning up and doing a good job anchoring yet another blockbuster, but he is really good here. He does portray the sort of guilt and desperation of that character, which is the driving emotion of the whole film, very well.
Yeah, and also like Odysseus is supposed to be, he's crafty, he's clever, that's his strength. He's the smartest of the Aegean generals, and that's why he works his way through all these different like challenges that is set on his way home. And I think Matt Damon is well cast as someone who's like a soldier, but like more of a intellectual soldier versus obviously John Bernthal. The sort of type casting of him is more like the kind of like grizzled tough guy, whereas like Matt Damon I think is well cast as someone who's smart. Yeah, he's really, really good in the role. There's quite a lot of like emotion, a bit, especially like him like talking about how he misses his family, and also like his love for his men and trying to get them home despite all the challenges and sort of obstacles that they face, and that provides the emotional core of the film. And one of the interesting things is that, like, famously, Homer's stories have no interiority. Everything is like straight up. Like, people say what they mean and then do it. And, like, there's never a bit when someone goes, like, I will fight with you, brother. And then goes, like, no, actually, I will betray you. At the key moment, like, which is one of those things, like, people think, like, so the Aegeans just sort of disappear and leave, like, a big horse. And the Trojans are very much like, oh, yeah, like, horse, that's great. Let's bring it inside our city. In a story where absolutely no one, like, really lies or deceives or has any form of interiority, it is actually a genius level move to basically be like, should we represent something as not what it actually is? Which is why everyone's like, oh, Odysseus, you're too clever by half. But famously, no interiority to Homer's writing. So that's something that the modern filmmaking and Nolan has to bring to it, because we want that in our stories. And it works really well here by like adding this layer of like Odysseus as sort of like tortured veteran, trying to deal with his guilt, the loss of his men, deal with the guilt from being away from home, dealing with his anger, what his home's kind of become in his absence. There's this element of interiority to it that is again something we need, and like that's what we want from our modern storytelling, and he's brought it in a way that kind of really works with the story and the source material, so I appreciate that a lot.
People often say about Christopher Nolan's work that he's not very emotional anyway, I suppose, or they portray his work as the cold workings of a clockmaker, somewhat similar to what people say about Jonathan Hickman in comics. But anyway, so I guess you could say that the Odyssey, a story with no interior emotions, suits him, but I think he has actually done a good job of levering in some emotion and providing a steady string of character moments throughout, well, helped by, I guess, the actors. But small moments, like a lot of the moments with Anne Hathaway venting to her son, or Odysseus and his torment on the beach with Calypso. Though he is very much milking it all for emotion. He's very much, I guess, focusing in on these small moments to give a lot of the epic stuff grounding, which I suppose is what you have to do in these 3-hour semi-historical epics.
Yeah, and Nolan is really good at like blockbuster filmmaking. He's got a good sense of what the audience really want and what will be a great summer blockbuster. So that works really well. Yeah, again, like he's bringing these elements in because he's like, well, this is what the audience wants, and like has a really good sense. Yeah, kind of like Spielberg did, certainly well back in the day. Spielberg has a great sense of like, this will really work. You know, something to see like a craftsman just like making a great entertaining film.
Yeah, I will be interested to see if this, an actual action epic, is more or less successful than Oppenheimer, a movie about, as some people put it, a series of human resources hearings.
Yeah, which is an interesting take, yeah. I mean, Oppenheimer, I don't know to what degree it was helped to its blockbuster box office by being out on the same day as Barbie and being caught up in that big moment. But obviously, the film itself got to the point of winning like loads and loads of Oscars. Yeah, and I think we both said it as our favourite film of the year it came out, and it was our joint favourite film of the year. So, yeah, no, and Oppenheimer was great. And here we have another candidate for certainly the top 5 of the year.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if it's going to be number 1, but I imagine it'll be up there, yeah, because it was just a very pure moment of cinema for me. I was just very immersed in this story. Even though I'm not, to be honest, a big historical fiction guy, and due to my tiny, simple, childlike mind, sometimes struggle to fully relate to the struggles of people long ago using weird, flowery language. But no, this was very good. I mean, it helps, but I gather in some quarters, controversially, he's very much written the dialogue into mostly sort of conversational American English.
Yeah.
Which I gather some people have chafed on things like Telemachus referring to Penelope and Odysseus as mom and dad.
Yeah, I did pick up on that when I was watching it. There was definitely some like modern sort of dialogue bits thrown in, and like I think there's one bit when Odysseus says like, "Oh, I'm not the problem," and it was like that's definitely a very modern phrasing. But on some levels, it's like it did take me out. Occasionally, took me a little bit out of it, but not in a big way. But like also, it's like I don't really know what people want, because unless you want to go full Mel Gibson and like basically have a whole thing.
Never a good move, I think.
No. Well, I mean, obviously Mel Gibson is a nutter and has like totally gone off the boil. But he did make 2 films with like extreme emphasis on historical accuracy, such as telling the story of the Passion in Aramaic and ancient Hebrew. He didn't go far enough to cast someone from Palestine as Jesus, but yeah, and then did like a story set in the Aztec world again in the Aztec language. So actually that's one of the few things with these historical epics, the ones that try to be more accurate, obviously they just do use some degree of modern language. So unless you want it to be actually in ancient Greek, then everything's interpretation, isn't it? And yeah, you're filtering it through this level of like, it's a fantasy film and things like that is what you're coming to see. Like you're coming to see like a fantasy film in the same way, and I say fantasy in the same way that like you go and see a rom-com, and that's a fantasy as well. Like it's a fantasy of what a romantic relationship should be like. You go to see like a workplace drama, and like that's a fantasy of what it would be like to work in that
have
world.
A job.
Yeah, have a job. Yeah, imagine that. Or even like The West Wing is kind of a fantasy about how amazing it would be to work in the White House, and like they're selling this like fictionalized version. So as long as it's enough for you to believe in it, because obviously you have to believe in it to be swept into the story and the characters. But I don't see a point of like why it has to be, why making it sound vaguely Edwardian, which is what most people settle on. They either do like it's kind of a bit Edwardian for anything from like Shakespeare adaptations to historical epics, or basically cod medievalisms.
Well, yeah. When people say it doesn't sound historical enough, what they mean is it's not translated into flowery, vaguely Shakespearean BBC period drama language like Game of Thrones.
But sometimes I just end up rolling my eyes at things and go, when someone have like, do you have coin for the night? And goes, you can just say, do you have money? Like, we're familiar with the concept of money. It's existed for a long time. You can just say,
you got the cash?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, yeah, because again, even, like, people go, like, oh, we want Game of Thrones to basically be, like, medieval England. Well, it's not done in Middle English, is it? People go, like, oh, it's historically accurate because, like, women have no power and just get, like, raped and murdered and, like, everything's violent and stuff. And it's like, okay, but, like, it's not in Middle English, is it? So, what you're willing to accept is, I guess, a personal thing, but like I think most people are willing to accept actually more than probably angry people on the internet will give them credit for.
Well, yeah, like as you say, he's not going to do it in ancient Greek, so why not just do it in modern English rather than some weird half-assed compromise?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose he could have done it in Greek and subtitled it, but he's not going to do that, so yeah.
That's what Mel Gibson did, and it worked when it was The Passion because people really liked Jesus, funnily enough. But I don't think Apocalypto was a big success, although some people do really like it.
Yeah, I think he's aiming for a wider audience, or Christopher Nolan. I think we're going for the general action blockbuster audience who probably just want to hear Matt Damon screaming in standard English.
Yeah, and it goes back to what we were saying, that like it's got this element of summer blockbuster. He's got really good knowledge of like what audiences want, and like will take these stories and fit them into the sort of the template of modern filmmaking, summer blockbustering. And for those of you who really here for the historical accuracy, it does mention several times the Bronze Age collapse, which is not in Homer because he couldn't see the future, but there was an element of, shortly after the 12th century BC of the Bronze Age, civilization did collapse very quickly, and we went from living in cities back to living in small rural farming communities. No one really knows why, and it's a big archaeological mystery, and that is weaved into the story. If you're here for your Bronze Age historical accuracy, then fill your boots on people talking about the looming collapse of civilization, and civilization rising again after a period of darkness, because there you go. There's some historical accuracy for you.
Yeah, the closest Christopher Nolan does get to having a bit of a meta play. Okay, and last up today, we're here to talk about Widow's Bay, the hit show on Apple TV, which takes place in a spooky ooky island town, which is besieged by an increasing amount of spooky occurrences, strange disappearances, and terrifying weather, all of which is managed in an increasingly nervous, twitchy way by Mayor Tom Loftus, played by Matthew Rhys. And now, perhaps ill-advisedly, he is attempting to open up the island as a major tourism venue. Will this work? Will people die? Let's find out. Alistair, what did you think of this?
Well, so this was sort of billed as a Welcome to Night Vale-like sort of thing. It's kind of small town America horror comedy type situation. And yeah, certainly if you're a fan of Welcome to Night Vale, that sort of vibe, then you will like this. Yeah, and I thought this was good as well. But what I liked about this is it maybe takes it a bit more seriously than Welcome to Night Vale, in that the comedy was sort of the main thing and the sort of heartwarming stories. And the horror, although there were some quite weird bits and some sort of like generally sort of strange bits, the horror was more like the sort of signifiers of the genre, especially sort of Lovecraftian horror, as opposed to actually being generally scary. Whereas this, although there's some pretty good comedic moments, it's also like building a sense of dread. Some of the horror things they encounter are pretty scary, and it's sort of well done in that the horror is taken quite seriously, which I like, even though there are still some like comedy bits of like the local guy just screaming like, "Don't go in there, it's haunted, it's haunted." That horror trope is kind of done as, that guy's just a sort of a local hick. And it's kind of played for laughs a bit, but as well it's also been, when people inevitably do go in there, it can actually be quite scary.
Yeah, I like the fact that, as you say, the horror is taken quite seriously. I think some comedy horror stuff just throws the tropes in a way that, certainly in the case of Welcome to Night Vale, borders on twee. I have enjoyed Welcome to Night Vale in my time, but I did eventually feel like I'd kind of seen everything it had to offer and stopped listening to it. But yeah, this, I think, does do a good job of having this building story and this mounting sense of dread. The main actor, Matthew Rhys, playing the mayor, is someone I've enjoyed. He was actually one of the main spy couple in The Americans, the other one obviously being Kerry Russell of The Diplomat fame. So yeah, it's good to see them both moving on to good popular shows. Yeah, he's really good in this, playing a very different role to his part in The Americans, as this quite sort of relatable, nervous guy trying to do his best to run this spooky town, despite the fact that he's obviously kind of terrified of it. And, with some obvious like dark family history that unspools throughout the series and reveals, his personal stakes in this. Although, to be honest, it's quite well told in that, although a lot of the stuff about his personal history and why he's doing all this is unveiled throughout the series, if you're paying attention in the first few episodes, you could pretty much get what he's doing and why he's doing it. It's not the most complicated motivation in the world, and it does work, and it does mean that character is quite well grounded and makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, he's a good emotional core to it, and there are some flashbacks and stuff during quite a funny episode where he inadvertently takes like some very powerful magic mushrooms, which is, again, that's a sort of comedy moment when he ends up at this sort of local drug dealer's house and then ends up inadvertently taking the mushrooms. But then that does lead to some like introspection and flashbacks through the kind of hallucinations, and it fills in his character, and you get a sense of like why he's doing these things, that it's more than just he's like a local guy concerned about his son. There's kind of reasons for him that they're very believable and relatable. I thought that the relationship between the dad and the son was quite well done, considering in some ways it's not really breaking new grounds, because it's like, a teenage son tearing away and wants out and wants more than his tiny sort of like rural community has to offer. A guy is a single dad with a job, not maybe focused enough on his relationship. I mean, we've seen all this stuff before, but even in the moments of conflict between them, it does come across as like quite genuine and believable.
Yeah, as TV tearaway teenagers go, he's one of the better ones, I think, partly because there's a certain amount of motivation and explanation given for why he feels so restless and is acting out so much, because he's never left the island because his dad is convinced he can't leave the island or he'll die. So it does make sense that it's quite well grounded. I also enjoyed the character Patricia, played by Kate O'Flynn. There's an episode, possibly the best episode, or certainly one of my favourite episodes, where she ends up hosting a demonic party.
Oh, that's good,
which I thought was brilliant, actually. That might actually be on the best episodes of the year list for me.
Yeah, and it's also a good one. Like the main character, well, if Tom's the main character, he's basically not in that episode, which is a bold choice, kind of remind you when Doctor Who would do one without the Doctor in it. And that's a great one when you're waiting for the other shoe to drop the whole time. And when it does, it's really, really good. Yeah, a nice self-contained story. It felt like it might have been an episode of The Twilight Zone or something like that.
Yeah, and it was really good horror just in so much as things were always slightly wrong, and there was some stuff that was obviously slightly off. And she's got this book, which is obviously a bit weird. And yeah, things just get slightly more wrong and slightly more off as the evening goes along until it just reaches this ridiculous, horrific climax. And again, there's a few jokes, there's a few sort of self-aware moments. Like there's a very funny moment where she's talking to one of her colleagues and basically just goes, why didn't you tell me I was doing all this weird stuff? She was like, you said you didn't want us to criticise you.
Yeah.
And that sort of thing is funny, but also they fully commit to the fact that it's genuinely unsettling.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I really liked about this show was that the horror isn't played for laughs so much. It's done straight up and things like that. So when they do kind of go into horror, and it kind of reminds me actually a lot of Shaun of the Dead, which actually is a film I really, really like in the sense of the horror is serious and done seriously, but it is these silly characters with their everyday relatable silliness. I mean, Shaun of the Dead famously, the rom-com. It's basically a rom-com full of silly people having dysfunctional romantic relationships plus serious zombies. And there's a cast of quite funny local characters. There's his aide who is just kind of old and out of it and bad at her job. There's the other person who works in the mayor's office who's just constantly smoking and spreading gossip about people and things like that, and just generally being a bit unpleasant. And then there's a local guy who's very much the island is haunted, and a guy who runs a crappy hotel who's very aware of how crappy it is. And these are all comedy characters, but then once the horror kicks in, it does stay very much with the kind of this is scary, and it's almost never undone with we're building up to a joke sort of here situation. Occasionally there's a sort of, well, I'll kind of say ghost train sort of moments, which is sort of beat you don't see very often. I've seen it done in the theatre a couple of times, which is basically build up, and then you get something really scary and it really makes you jump. And then when you think about it, you realise that's actually quite daft. And it's kind of funny that made you jump. But in the moment, it was generally scary. The best example of this is, I think, in the second episode when the mayor has to win a bet, has to stay in this haunted hotel. And he meets another creepy guy there and it's building tension, and then at the end he's revealed he's also dressed as a psychopathic murderous clown and kind of just charges towards the mayor. And it's this moment where, when suddenly a murderous clown just sort of pops out at you after a long build up of tension, you do generally go oh, that's quite unpleasant. A few seconds later you're like, that's really quite silly, isn't it? And it's quite a good beat, and it's not one that's done very often, partly because it's hard to do right. That's, I guess, the closest it gets to subverting the horror, but at the same time, that only works if you take the horror completely seriously and every moment of the way, which is what this does. So it's why it's a hard beat to do, but I do like it.
Yeah, well, that was the second episode, so they're still sort of easing you into it in some ways. So you've got this sort of, at that point, the horror is still on this sort of, is it real, is it not stage, where it's just, they're slightly playing it to a, could he just be dreaming way? Yeah. But it quickly becomes clear he is not, in fact, dreaming. And yeah, there's a lot of what I think in some ways are Parks and Recreation style jokes about, the futility and bureaucracy and inanity of local government, with Tom Loftus and his colleagues working to try and improve the lives of these people who are mostly ungrateful and seem to resent them for trying, which was a funny beat in Parks and Rec and is a funny beat here when there's monsters involved.
Yeah, it's an interesting evolution of that comedy beat. Yeah, that works well. Yeah, and also I can see that if you liked your Parks and Rec, you'd like this as well. And, if you've got a sort of Parks and Rec shaped hole in your life.
Yeah, in the second half of the series, I think it gets a bit away from the standalone horror stories and more into, well, there's a couple of more standalone bits, but there's a lot of story arc stuff as it gets towards the finale, which has some big reveals about what's going on with the town and what's going on with Tom's family. And I will not spoil those on this podcast because they're good reveals and I like the show and people should watch it. But yeah, I do think the second half isn't quite as standout good as some of the standalone episodes in the first half, which, as I say, the Patricia run especially I thought was great, but I think all the first half episodes are pretty strong. Apart from maybe the pilot, which has quite a lot of setup to do. But yes, it's still a very good experience. I did enjoy watching it sort of come together in the second half.
Yeah, and what I liked about it is it did sort of shift and evolve as it went along. So like in the first episode is very much sets this dynamic of the mayor doesn't believe in the horror stuff, and the local people are like, you know, is it real? Is it in his head? Are they all just like superstitious hicks? And then like he gets obviously like sees enough that he's convinced to the point when then he ends up embarrassing himself with his over the top reaction. And then they do that again in the second episode. And I was a bit like, oh, I hope this doesn't just become like basically like the same sort of thing over and over, which is like the mayor says this isn't haunted. He goes in, he finds out it's haunted and ends up embarrassing himself. But then they do kind of like shift the dynamic as it goes along of him basically like the mayor changing into basically being someone who is like more open-minded to the supernatural and darkness of the island. And then I liked how it kind of shifted gears as it went along.
Yeah, and he does get definitely very invested in it to an almost scary degree by the end. But anyway, I probably shouldn't hint vaguely at spoilers, that would be rude. I enjoyed seeing Stephen Root in this. He's one of these, I guess, character actors who pops up a lot playing background parts as often quite memorable, grumpy, slightly off-putting people in TV shows. And here he's playing Wick, the sort of local guy who lives by the harbour and believes very strongly in all the haunted stuff and likes to yell at the mayor about it. And again, his character starts off as a sort of slightly broad, yelling supernatural believer guy at the start, and actually gets quite a lot of depth and pathos and more meaningful relationships with the various other characters by the end, which is quite a nice development. And yeah, I enjoy Stephen Root. He was good in The West Wing, he's good in Barry, he's good in many things, and he's good in this.
Yeah, very much so, yeah. And Katie O'Flynn as Patricia, I thought was really, really good. She's, a really good actress. Like, I especially enjoyed her in Happy Go Lucky, which is a Mike Leigh film from quite a while ago, actually, but one that actually is kind of a bit more fun and rom-com-y than a lot of, like, Mike Leigh's stuff. Yeah, so I'm surprised that she hasn't had more, like, sort of high-profile roles after that, because she was really, really good. She was great in Mr. Turner, which was, a very straight-up British-style biography of the painter. I think she's done quite a few things, like, Bridget Jones films and stuff. I thought she was well cast here, again, like playing an American. And also like Jeff Hiller as Dale. He's one of those guys you just like sees cropping up in things like all the time. Yeah, he's been in quite a few things like American Horror Story and things like that. My partner really recognized him from some of the things she's watched, but I think not so much I. But yeah, he's kind of good in doing kind of slightly odd, creepy dude in a horror thing.
Yeah, just generally, I think it's one of these shows that has a very strong sense of its own aesthetic and its own genre and what it's going for, and yeah, it plays for it and it gets it. It's got a very strong sense of its own identity, which I think is probably why it's done really well and resonated and found an audience quite quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the things I really liked about Welcome to Night Vale. It did have a really good understanding of the genre and the tropes and played with them quite well, and this does as well. Yeah, clearly the people behind it are like horror fans and understand kind of what works well, and like, because you see these like things that kind of trot out the really obvious horror tropes, whereas like in this one, like the haunted mist, I thought was like not as well known horror trope that they do in the first episode, and works really well. So they clearly like know their horror.
Yeah, no, I enjoy the way that it's one of these sort of similar to Buffy back in the day. It's very much a sort of, this location is just a general magnet to all the horror things. Any horror genre we want to do could just pop up here and it's just there. Fair enough, if you can get that sort of engine working, then you've got a fun basis for a TV show. Yeah,
I can see why this has been one of the viral hits of the year in that like it's quite a lot of buzz. I mean, it's on Apple TV, so it's got like money behind it, and like stars one of the guys from The Americans, like a big hit show. But at the same time, it's like not as high profile as some things, but so this is more that seems to have connected with its audience online very much and like become a buzzy talked about sort of show.
It's got a lot of charm, I guess, which always goes down well with the online audience, and fair enough, can recommend, I agree.
That's all we have time for today. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this episode of Moderate Fantasy Violence, then please subscribe in your podcatcher of choice and leave us a review. You can also visit our website, moderatefantasyviolence.com, where you can find previous issues of the podcast, bonus audio clips, and short written pieces by Nick and myself.
And if you particularly enjoyed that experience, you can follow us on social media, where we are Moderate Fantasy Violence on, I want to say, Facebook and Blue Sky. And
Yay.
Yes, and if you like that, then why not also follow me? I am nickvine.com on Blue Sky and on the internet and on Instagram, but with the word dot instead of a dot, where you can hear about my self-published comics, including Courier Z Volume 2, coming to a letterbox near you.
You can also follow me on TikTok, Instagram and Blue Sky by searching for Alistair Ball. You can find more of my writing at redtrainblog.com, and you can find my theatre reviews at Everything Theatre, or you can find my newsletter, The Post, any of the above social media channels. You can also join us here next time when we will be discussing another 2 of the biggest films of the year, most likely. We will be visiting our beloved MCU Spider-Man in Spider-Man Brand New Day, and then we will also be discussing Obsession, one of the viral horror hits of the summer. Should be a good episode next time. Tune in for those 2 reviews. Until then, have a good one, and goodbye.
Bye.